Happy holidays, everyone. Me, M. Numbers. I just love to say, from the bottom of my heart, that however you celebrate this hallowed time, I wish you a very auspicious holiday season and glad tidings for a hopeful new year. My family celebrates Christmas, and despite the fact that the religious element has been removed from our observation of the holiday for quite some time, for us, it's still a time to reconnect with family, be gracious, and of course, make more food than it is physically possible to eat. Now, all of these things I hold in my heart like a Yuletide log, warming me from the inside out and giving me the tingly feeling that I always associate. It is not time to talk about that sappy nonsense. It is time for Christmas horror. Believe it or not, there is an entire pantheon of holiday monsters that exist out in the world. You've probably already heard about some of these before, but I want to talk about them now. Let's begin with the one that probably most people know about. Krampus, the anti-Santa, whose name straight up means claw. Believed to be of German creation, there's a bit of literature out there that believes that the Krampus was actually part of pagan winter solstice celebrations much before, potentially even as far back as Norse beliefs. According to Britannica, as Christianity started to spread and became more popular, the Krampus eventually became part of some Christmas folklore despite the church's best intentions. From what I remember as far as Krampus's activities during Krampusnacht, he apparently flies around with good old Saint Nick, and as Nick is giving gifts to the nice kids, at his least nightmarish, Krampus is only beating the bad kids, and at his worst, he's either eating them or dragging them down to hell. Which, as far as reasons to be a good kid throughout the year, being eaten and, dragged to hell by a horrifying goat creature is as good a threat as any. This makes me think, though, is Saint Nick just sitting there in his sleigh watching with an empty look in his eyes as children by the thousands are being violently eviscerated in front of him? And he does nothing to stop them? I suppose his generosity only goes so far. Either that or trying to stop Krampus from his activities is just a little too much effort for Santa Claus, which he's been flying through the night and giving gifts all night. How would he have the energy to do anything? And before you ask, yes, of course, German parents dress up as Krampus to terrify their children. Honestly, in my opinion, there are so many reasons that parents should be going out of their way to terrify their children during holidays meant for joy and gift giving, chiefest of which being that it's really funny. Despite everyone's knowledge of Krampus, there's another German Christmas monster that I accidentally learned about when I was at language immersion camp that I feel is equally fascinating. Frau Perchta. Some places say that Frau Perchta is Krampus's wife, some places make no mention of that, but assuming that her name contains Frau, that must mean that she's betrothed in some way. If she weren't married, she'd be Fräulein Perchta. I've also seen it written that old Germans called her Frau Perchta, and according to some research, she takes part in something called the Wild Hunt, which, I know Witcher fans, I've played the game, and I expect you all to sound off in the comments. For all of us in the real world, the Wild Hunt is, in essence, just like a big old bad omen. Winds howling. She's pretty intriguing since, in a lot of her lore, she's actually kind of a blend of both St. Nicholas and Krampus. She can be Weissfrauen, or Schönperchte, where she rewards good children and young servants with a silver coin for doing a good job, but to anyone who was bad or disrespectful to her, she would change to her more hideous, haggard form called the Schachperchte, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, guys, cut open your belly and rip out your organs, and in the empty cavity that remains, she'd stuff in straw, rocks, and trash. Now, generally, if you've kept your place tidy and you've done the correct amount of spinning, you should be fine. Should be. How one would recognize her in the wild is that she has a large foot, which is referenced in some writings as Perchta or Perchta mit dem Fuß, which directly means Perchta with the foot. This seems a little strange at the outset, but as a story concept, I think it's actually pretty interesting, the idea that this higher being can shapeshift however she wants, but requires a certain mark of her divinity that she can't really shed. Not to keep outdoing Nick and Krampus, but Perchta also has an entire entourage with her as well, called the Perchten, where they share similar powers to her and would fly with her through the night. And yep, you guessed it, men would dress as the Perchten and go from house to house to scare away dead spirits and probably all the children inside as well. Next, I want to talk about Gryla from Icelandic folklore, which is a creature that I kind of heard about here and there, but she was actually suggested to me after doing a whole bunch of research on Perchta. Thanks, Googs. Apparently, first mentions of Gryla were traced back to the 13th century in the Islendinga saga, which is a part of the Sturlunga saga, which is itself a big old compilation of stories and histories of the age of Sturlungs, which is between 1100 and 1200 CE. The original story was handed down through oral tradition, and according to legend, Gryla was a horrifying troll who would live in the Icelandic wilderness and come down from the forest to snatch up misbehaving children and put them in her rucksack, where she'd then take those bad children back to her home and eat them. Boy, these monsters all seem to share the same disdain for children that I do. What sets Gryla apart, though, is that, like Perchta, she also has an entourage of creatures that are a part of her legend, but who are, in this particular case, her children. The Yule Lads. Not gonna lie, as I read along, I originally thought that the names were the only ridiculous part. But then I'd read what each of these Yule Lads do, and would come to the realization each time that this world is a wonderful place where we used to believe in some of the most amazing stuff. And, we probably still should, because this world would be so much more chaotic and hilarious. Also, bear in mind that the Yule Lads tend to not necessarily be evil, more of a nuisance. Let's begin, and apologies in advance to any Icelandic people out there if I completely butcher these names. Stekkjastaur, or the sheepcoat clod, sucks milk from sheep and generally harasses them and has peg legs. Giljaguar, or Gullygawk, hides in barns and steals milk froth. That's right, not all of the milk, just the froth. Stufur, or Stubby, is short, as his name suggests, and will steal your pans to eat the crust out of them. Devorisleikir, or Spoon Licker, will steal your Devor, long wooden spoons, to lick them, which, I originally thought was gross. And then I remembered that people make cookie dough with long wooden spoons, which, it's still pretty gross and unsanitary. Don't eat raw cookie dough. Potasleikir, or pot licker, seeing a trend here, will just, pretty easy steal leftovers from pots. Askasleikir, or bowl licker, it just keeps going with the licking. Like the others, will steal your food. However, after some further research, I learned that he'll steal specifically from an askur, which is an interesting bowl with a lid, which people would leave on the sides of their beds, and Askasleikir would steal the food from them. After subsequently looking up what an askur is, I've decided that I definitely need one in my life. Hurðskeller, or door slammer, will slam doors, specifically during the night. Skirgamor, or skyr gobbler, is obsessed with skyr, which I just learned is an Icelandic yogurt, and would steal any skyr that he'd find. Bjugnakrikir, or sausage swiper, would, as his namesake implies, steal sausages that were being smoked. Glugagíkur, or window peeper, is just by far the creepiest Yule Lad. I don't want to see little eyes peering at me through the darkness. That's terrifying. Gatateifur, or doorway sniffer. Now, stay with me. This one has a few twists and turns. Supposedly is sniffing doorways specifically to find Laufbrauð, which is like a Christmas bread, which the more I was reading into these characters, the more I realized that I don't have nearly enough holiday foods in my life. Kertasníkir, or candle stealer, will straight up steal your candles, which is devastating for people living in Iceland during the 1300s, but even worse for a cottagecore girly like myself. I like a good candle. Lastly, Kettkrókur, or meat hook. Don't worry, he doesn't violently bisect you with a meat hook. He just uses that meat hook to steal meat, so we dodged a bullet there. Now my question is this: were there really Yule Lads out there running around in the frigid Icelandic countryside stealing all the leftovers and making a lot of noise, or did an Icelandic guy just happen to have the worst roommate ever? Perhaps it's just my feelings about the winter solstice season, where A focus on finishing up a year and coming together with close family to spend time takes a front row seat in my life, but there's something oddly comforting to me about a fleet of supernatural beings all coming around during the holiday season to check whether, I've been a good person, kept my place clean and organized, and, will subsequently mess with me and steal my foods. Also, you gotta love a good themed monster. There are always stories that I end up rereading around the holiday season. The one that I always hit up, not in the books, but on the screen as well, is A Christmas Carol. Most of you should be at least passingly familiar with the general story of A Christmas Carol, but it's the story of a grumpy businessman named Ebenezer Scrooge, who generally has a distaste for merriment and providing cheer during the Christmas season, but is then subsequently haunted by several Christmas ghosts until he's traumatized into liking Christmas for the betterment of a small and weak child that he grows an unyielding and strangely pervasive attachment toward. FBI, open up! A Christmas Carol has been a staple of my holiday season ever since an SF-ACT performance of the show in the early 2000s terrified me as a kid, but it wasn't until I was thumbing through a secondhand copy of a Hans Christian Andersen anthology when I stumbled upon a story that I recognized but I hadn't fully remembered. It's called The Little Match Girl, which I had read once before when I was young. However, there must have been like a cross wire somewhere because for some reason, the fact that this story took place at Christmas time must have flown completely over my head as a child. Also, I've scoured my brain, but I can't for the life of me remember if I understood the entire point of the story when I first read it. Maybe the true darkness of the tale was maybe a bit too much for my fragile adolescent mind, but I'm an adult with big brain now, and now that I've reread it, I've come to decide that The Little Match Girl is my all-time favorite Christmas horror story. Normally, reading directly from books wouldn't be allowed on the internet, but Hans Christian Andersen stories are within the public domain. So come, sit with me by the fire, little one, and I'll tell you the story of The Little Match Girl. It was so terribly cold. Snow was falling, and it was almost dark. Evening came on, the last evening of the year. In the cold and gloom, a poor little girl, bareheaded and barefoot, was walking through the streets. Of course, when she had left her house, she'd had slippers on. But what good had they been? They were very big slippers, too big for her, for they belonged to her mother. The little girl had lost them running across the road, where two carriages had rattled by terribly fast. One slipper she'd not been able to find again, and a boy had run off with the other, saying he could use it very well as a cradle someday, when he had children of his own. And so, the little girl walked on her naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. In an old apron, she carried several packages of matches, and she held a box of them in her hand. No one had bought any from her all day long, and no one had given her a cent. Shivering with the cold and hunger, she crept along, a picture of misery, poor little girl. The snowflakes fell on her long, fair hair, which hung in pretty curls over her neck. And all the window lights were shining, and there was a wonderful smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she even thought of that. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected farther out into the street than the other, she sat down and drew her little feet underneath her. She was getting colder and colder, but did not dare go home, for she had sold no matches, nor earned a single cent, and her father would surely beat her. Besides, it was cold at home, for they had nothing over them but a roof through which the wind whistled, even through the biggest cracks, which had been stuffed with straw and rags. Her hands were almost dead with cold. Oh, how much one little match might warm her. If she could only take one from the box and rub it against the wall to warm her hands. She drew one out. Ratch! How it sputtered and burned. It made a warm, bright flame like a little candle as she held her hands over it, but it gave a strange light. It seemed to the little girl as if she were sitting before a great iron stove with shining brass knobs and a brass cover. how wonderfully the fire burned, how comfortable it was. The youngster stretched out her feet to warm them too. Then the little flame went out, the stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the burnt match in her hand. She struck another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and when the light fell upon the wall, it became transparent like a thin veil, and she could see through it into a room. On the table, a snow-white cloth was spread, and on it stood a shining dinner service. The roast goose steamed gloriously, stuffed with apples and prunes. And what was still better, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled along the floor with a knife and fork in its breast, right over to the little girl. Then the match went out, and she could only see the thick, cold wall. She lighted another match. Then she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and much more beautiful than the one she had seen last Christmas through the glass door at the rich merchant's home. Thousands of candles burned on the green branches, and colored pictures like those in the print shops looked down at her. The little girl reached both her hands toward them. Then the match went out, but the Christmas lights mounted higher. She saw them now as bright stars in the sky. One of them fell down, forming a long line of fire. Now someone is dying, thought the little girl, for her only grandmother, the only person who had loved her and who was now dead, had told her that when a star fell down, a soul went up to God. She rubbed another match against the wall. It became bright again, and in the glow, the old grandmother stood clear and shining, kind and lovely. "Grandmother," cried the little child, "oh, take me with you. I know you will disappear when the match is burned out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the wonderful roast goose, and the beautiful Christmas tree." And she quickly struck the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother with her. And the matches burned with such a glow that it became brighter than daylight. Grandmother had never been so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both of them flew in brightness and joy above the earth, very, very high, and up there was neither cold, nor hunger, nor fear. They were with God. But in the corner, leaning against the wall, sat the little girl with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. The New Year's sun rose upon a little pathetic figure. The child sat there stiff and cold, holding the matches, of which one bundle was almost burned. She wanted to warm herself, the people said. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen and how happily she had gone with her old grandmother into the bright new year. I suppose you're wondering why I'd classify that as a Christmas horror story, and I guess if you can't find the abject horror in child poverty, then I suppose you and I are very different people. Nevertheless, I feel as though The Little Match Girl has become a special part of my holiday season, specifically because, unlike some of the other media out there that tries to guilt you into being a good person on the holidays, I feel as though this story oozes with a certain realism and honesty in storytelling that others can't quite replicate. So that's why I gravitate toward The Little Match Girl when I, need to put the ABS brakes on any potential Christmas joy flying around. Now, those two stories are intended to be a little spooky, but now I want to move on to media that isn't meant to be scary on Christmas, but is. Here's the thing. I know that these movies are supposed to be cheery and are meant for kids, but oh by gosh, by golly, did they implant some long-lasting trauma that manifested as an enduring love of stop motion and horror later in life. I'm going to begin with the Rankin Bass movies because yes, they're cheery, but lordy, did they feel, spooky, and they left this underlying sense of dread when I watched them as a youngster. It's the same kind of lingering fear that I experienced when I was watching those early Wallace and Gromits. The not so smooth animation mixed with liminal spaces. the vast, uncanny valley. The Rankin Bass movies have become a staple of the holiday season, at least on basic cable, but one of them definitely sits above the others in terms of Christmas horror: The Little Drummer Boy. As a kid, I believed the story to be about a little boy who meets Jesus for some reason and plays a sick-ass drum solo for him. I guess because Jesus was like a really rad baby or something like that, but little did I know that I was completely mistaken. We begin by learning that the kid actually has a name, Aaron, and that this kid hates people, just like all people. And you know what? As a vibe kid, same. So Aaron is just minding his own business in the desert, playing the drum while a bunch of animals dance to it for some reason. And a random guy in the desert, no joke, likes the kid so much that he takes him as a slave. Surprisingly, this old guy drags the kid to Jerusalem and not to his nearest NAMBLA chapter, where he shows off his surprisingly inept traveling circus performers to, the masses. And once they completely beef it, he forces Aaron to take the stage.
Smile!
I cannot. Not at them.
You stubborn little fool, then wear a painted one. There, that's better.
What do you get
I don't think so.
when you cross
I think
a
we're
mentally
done
ill
with you,
loner
George.
with
That's
a
it.
society that abandons him and treats him like trash?
Okay, I know this isn't my chief problem with The Little Drummer Boy, but the song he sings in this section is just completely unrelated to anything Christmas or Christ related. Like, why is this in the film? What is it about animals' inability to smile that requires you to sing about it? Now that I mention it, the slaver guy also sings a whole ass song, and the entire time he's running around in the desert and singing, Aaron is just standing there watching him. Run, kid! Who knows what this creepy guy has in store for you? You don't have Amber Alerts in your time yet. Nobody will be looking for you. We then learn Aaron's backstory, and honestly, does this kind of stuff belong in a children's movie? I know there's a great deal of nightmare fuel in old kids' media, but oh boy, nothing quite beats the concept of your father being murdered and unspeakable horrors done to your mother. And what, this kid just goes to the desert and forces animals to dance in a line together? Is that how he handles his trauma? Some other stuff happens where he goes to Bethlehem to see Jeebus, but ultimately the entirety of the Middle Eastern peoples eventually come together with a single drive that they can all unanimously follow, an ineffable truth that they can all understand, a creed they all share, and a doctrine that everyone can believe in. Tax evasion.
All the world should be taxed, and all went to be taxed, every one to his own city.
Is that the promised land that the Christians are always talking about? A land without taxes? Can I go there? But this may be projecting, but I have yet to discuss the thing that I find the most horrifying. I heard basically zero drums throughout the entirety of The Little Drummer Boy. Every time he played, there was either no drum in the background or it was a completely different percussion instrument.
Faster, old friends, faster!
After a while, it started to wear me down, started to break my sanity bit by bit. Where's the drum? Was there ever a drum? Am I not supposed to hear it? Are only true believers in Christ meant to be able to still hear the drum? Speaking of which, I almost didn't write this part of my script until I ended up accidentally watching The Polar Express again a few days ago before filming this part, and does this movie make for some nightmare fuel? Moving right past the hell car full of automatonophobia triggers and the terrifying hermit that is also a ghost for some reason, there are so many little things that happen in the movie that are barely mentioned, but I believe to be the actual scariest, or at least have the weirdest implications. You may not agree with me, but as an adult watching the film, the hot chocolate scene is quite terrifying. Yes, I'm starting right there at the hot chocolate scene.
Are there any Polar Express passengers in need of refreshment?
Imagine for a moment that you're a child on a mysterious train that appeared in front of your house despite no rails, and suddenly a whole bunch of strangers pile out from behind a door, singing a highly choreographed song about hot chocolate. And not only that, they're flinging the liquid over at like high speeds over you and your friends. And as the spectacle continues, you're just hoping, praying that none of these weird men have a shaky grip and spill the boiling hot liquid over you, because remember their one rule: never ever let it cool. What a needlessly threatening rule for something sweet like hot chocolate. For some reason, I'm just imagining the conductor like staring you in the eyes and threatening you, like, did you let that hot chocolate go cold, you little idiot? What did I say? What's the one thing I was singing about this whole time? You dopey moron. Don't let it cool. I'm going to pour you another cup, and you're going to finish it correctly this time. No, don't you dare blow on it. You aren't listening to me. Never, ever let it cool. I want to see blisters forming on the roof of your mouth. I want your tongue to be inoperable for the next 3 days. I want second-degree burns on your trachea. Drink it. Drink it faster. That's right. That's good. Now pour another one. You're going to show me that you know how to follow directions, and this time you're going to do it faster than before. Oh, sorry, that was kind of weird. I kind of blacked out there for a second. Before I get to my main point, I have to ask, how is it decided which children get to ride the magic train and which don't? Because Buddy got to go because he's about to stop believing in Santa, but this girl still definitely has a prevailing love of Santa and Christmas, and the little shrimp gets to go because he's poor. But what about all those other kids? None of which, by the way, got to experience all of the life-changing experiences that the main character did. Presumably, they were all just sitting in their seats, praying that they weren't going to die as a train hurtled across a frozen lake with no rails, watched as the kid who put them all in danger got the first Christmas gift, and then were finally forced to play a beta version of Wordle before being sent home. Is that really what happened? They played Wordle?
Thank you, sir. That is a public address microphone.
Also, Buddy's sister eventually stopped hearing the bell to Santa's sleigh after a while. He said so in the after part.
Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound.
Did she not get a turn on the Polar Express? Why does Buddy get to go, but she doesn't? What are the rules? Now that that's out of the way, here's the part that is not only confusing, but the implications may be even more devious. At the beginning of the movie, Buddy accidentally tears the pocket of his robe as he's running out to look at the train. After he goes through his life-altering trauma, he wakes up the next morning, and as he grabs his robe, it tears in exactly the same place as before his whole adventure. This means that, following the events of the story, this was all some elaborate dream space. This begs so many questions, like, did the time work normally in the dream space? Are those other kids real, or were they all NPCs that are meant to teach Buddy something about the spirit of Christmas? Another question, could he die in the dream space? If he died, would the dream simply reset in order to teach him to love Christmas? If that were the case, how many times would he have to reset before finally making it to the end of the dream? Perhaps dying in the dream kills his soul in the real world. And in a universe where he failed to make it to the North Pole, say, I don't know, by falling into a frozen lake or being abducted by the freaky train bum, or getting caught in the gears of Santa's OSHA violation spectacle, his parents walk into his room on Christmas morning to find a boy who is alive but has completely lost all ability to think and feel. But, and I feel this is the most important and potentially the scariest question of all, if this is a dream space, who's in control of it? If it's Santa himself, that means that he has created an unfathomably powerful dreamscape that can pull in the mind of any child in order to put them through a series of terrifying ordeals so that they're mentally and physically exhausted enough for their eventual meeting with Santa himself, who is presented as very godlike, all to profess their undying loyalty to the Santa dogma in exchange for boons.
What was that you said?
I believe. I believe.
If that isn't like seriously horrifying in its presentation, then I don't know what it is. Imagine your kid being drawn into that nightmare scenario. All right, lastly, in the animation department, I'm going to mention a Christmas horror animation that is actually meant to be scary and is genuinely spooky. And believe it or not, it's an episode from one of my favorite series, Love, Death, and Robots, Season 2, Episode 6, All Through the House. I'm not going to discuss it too much because if you enjoy horror like I do, then I want you to seek it out and watch it yourself, but trust me, it's worth it. Excellent concept. I'd like to speak a bit about the new year. I know that it has been a long time since I last made a video. I've been having some issues sleeping and with being sick, so as the new year approaches, I want to start making more videos. That's my New Year's resolution. And no matter what our expectations of the new year are, I want to wish everyone a happy 2026 and best of luck in your future endeavors. Thank you for watching. Me, I'm Numbers.